Jim's gambling debts are pushing him to the limit. He's in deep debts of gangsters who have made it clear that if he doesn't pay up, they'll cut him into pieces and bury him where no one will ever find him. For now, Jim is at the hospital, sitting with an old man who's living his final hours. The man's tears show the deep pain he feels. But despite knowing his time is almost up, he speaks to Jim harshly. He tells Jim that he won't be leaving him any inheritance. This man is Jim's grandfather. He knows about Jim's gambling addiction and is sure that Jim would just take the family fortune and gamble it all away. Although Jim is deeply saddened, he doesn't stay long at his grandfather's funeral. He doesn't even share the grief with his mother. Instead, he quickly returns to what he loves most, gambling and betting money. Jim arrives at a hidden underground casino. He walks in and notices a blonde girl looking at him, clearly recognizing him. Jim knows who she is too, but he keeps walking. He sits at an open blackjack table, starts placing bets. At first, things do go well. He's winning, but very soon the house takes everything. In total, Jim loses $80,000. Feeling frustrated, Jim heads to the bar for a drink to forget the defeat. Neville Baraka, a man who seems to be keeping an eye on the gamblers, approaches Jim and tries to start a conversation. Jim immediately shuts him down. Jim knows Neville is a loan shark and he's not in this casino by accident. This is how he finds new clients. Neville suggests a quick bet. Whoever draws the highest card wins. Jim, with just $500 left, agrees to the bet. Neville draws a king of clubs, while Jim pulls a three of hearts. Once again, Jim loses. Neville offers Jim a loan, but Jim refuses. He has other plans and heads upstairs to meet with Mr. Lee, the casino owner. When Jim asks for a $10,000 loan, Mr. Lee reminds him that he already owes him money, $260,000 to be exact. Jim, still persistent, asks Mr. Lee when he's ever missed a payment. Mr. Lee is a tough businessman and won't lend Jim another cent. Instead, he gives Jim 7 days to pay off his debt. With no other choice, Jim accepts a loan from Neville, $50,000 at a huge 20% interest rate. He heads back to the gaming room and goes straight to the casino's betting tables. Jim plays a few hands of blackjack and enjoys a short winning streak. But for someone with a gambling addiction, it's never enough. He decides to go all in on the roulette table. Ignoring Neville's advice, who warns that red has been hitting all night, Jim bets everything on black. The ball spins, but luck isn't on Jim's side. It lands on red. He loses everything he's won. Penniless, Jim leaves the underground casino at dawn, heading off to do something no one would expect: teach literature at a university in Los Angeles. In class, he talks about Shakespeare, but it's obvious from his face and bad mood that he had a rough night. As he lectures, Jim tells his students about how unfairly talent is distributed. He explains how some people are true geniuses, while others think they have talent but really don't. In his opinion, the only student in his class who has real potential as a writer is Amy Phillips, the blonde girl who recognized him in the casino. Later, Jim visits his mother, Roberta, though his real reason for the visit is to ask her for money. As an excuse, he brings along his student, Dexter, who is an excellent tennis player and offers to give his mother a tennis lesson. When the lesson ends, Jim's mother pays Dexter and then asks Jim what he really needs the money for. She suspects it's to cover his gambling debts. She refuses to give him the money and reminds him that it's always possible to change. Jim, however, tells her that his way of life is all he has left. This angers his mother, who tells him that she doesn't want to see him again and sends him away. As Jim leaves, his phone starts ringing. It's his creditors. In a desperate attempt to distance himself from his problems, Jim throws his phone into the pool, but he knows he can't really escape what's coming. Jim Bennett has just 6 days left to pay off his debts, so he turns to a loan shark named Frank. Frank, who seems to know everything, asks Jim why he should lend money to an addict who already owes $260,000 to a casino owner and $50,000 to another loan shark. He points out that Jim doesn't even seem scared of being killed and left in the woods. Frank then reminds Jim that he comes from a wealthy family and has a good education. Yet despite all of this, Jim still chooses to be what Frank calls a disgusting addict. Frank makes Jim an offer. He'll lend him the $260,000, but only on one humiliating condition. Jim has to admit out loud that he's a filthy gambling addict and that he's not a real man. That's the price for the loan. Jim, unable to accept such a filthy demand, leaves without a penny. Now Jim knows he needs to come up with the money fast. If he doesn't, Mr. Lee's men or Neville's men, whoever finds him first, will deal with him in ways far worse than he could imagine. Later, Jim is sitting alone in class when Amy walks in and they start talking. Amy asks if he really meant it when he said she had talent. Jim reassures her, saying that's why he told her to sit where he could see her in class. There's an obvious attraction between the two, but Jim turns down her invitation to go out for a meal. The next day, Jim is in a bad mood during class. He snaps at a student named Lamar. Jim kicks everyone else out of the room, leaving just Lamar behind to talk. Lamar opens up, explaining that he has knee problems and feels immense pressure from everyone to be someone he's not. Jim can relate to this and offers the boy some sympathy. Later, Jim is watching a basketball game on TV where Lamar is playing. While he watches, he glances out the window and sees Neville towing his car away as collateral for the debt Jim owes him. He takes out his frustration by smashing the TV. Just then, his mother shows up unexpectedly. She hands him a new cell phone and asks how much he owes. She's there because she received threatening calls at her house. Jim tells her it's not possible for them to go after the family if he doesn't pay. Furious, his mother slaps him and orders him to follow her to the bank. They head to the bank together, where Roberta withdraws $260,000 in cash. Outside the bank, she throws the money at Jim's feet, screaming that she never wants to see him again. Then, with tears in her eyes, she walks away. Now, Jim has just 4 days left to repay the $260,000 he owes the casino owner. But instead of heading straight to pay his debts, Jim picks up Amy and they drive out to the desert. There, they finally have an honest conversation. Jim tells her that if he could, he'd erase everything clean and start over. Then Jim does the unthinkable. He takes Amy to a casino to gamble. She watches as Jim reveals his true self, spending hours fully absorbed in the game, forgetting about everything else. Once again, Jim loses all his money. Afterward, they go back to Amy's apartment. They talk about why Jim is the way he is, but Amy has other things on her mind. She throws herself into his arms and kisses him passionately. They don't realize they're being watched from the street. The low-life lenders never miss anything, and now they know exactly who Jim Bennett cares about. With just 3 days left before the deadline, Neville's men find Jim on the street and beat him up. It seems like Jim isn't afraid of dying. Neville asks if he knows Lamar Allen, the basketball player. At first, Jim denies it, but then he admits Lamar is one of his students. Later at home, Jim gets drunk and wakes up to find Mr. Lee, the Korean casino owner, sitting in his living room, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. Jim still doesn't have the money, nor does he have a plan for how he's going to pay. Lee orders his men to dunk Jim headfirst into a tub of water. After they leave, they write in big letters on the wall, "Monday, the final deadline for payment." Feeling desperate, Jim tries to sell his Omega watch, but he can't strike a deal. Now he knows that he's as good as dead. Soon after, Neville's men kidnap Jim, taking him to an old building. Tied to a chair, Jim listens as Neville accuses him of giving the wrong contact info for Lamar. In response, Neville has his men beat Jim again. Neville then gives Jim an ultimatum: convince Lamar to win the next game by less than 7 points. If Lamar doesn't follow through, Neville threatens to kill Amy and show Jim pictures of her body before killing him too. Jim sits in his office at the university, deep in thought, and suddenly Amy walks in. They argue as they head into the hallway, and Jim asks Amy to say goodbye. He tells her that if she hears him knock on her door, it means he's alive and everything is okay. But if she doesn't, it's because he's dead. Amy, visibly shaken and upset, leaves. Determined to try and fix the mess he's made of his life, Jim decides to talk to Lamar one last time. Lamar is training alone, and Jim approaches him. They talk, and Jim asks Lamar if he wants to make $150,000 in less than 2 hours. All Lamar has to do is make sure his team wins by 7 points or less. Lamar walks away without giving any answer. In one final attempt, Jim goes back to Frank to ask if he'll lend him the money this time. Incredibly, Frank agrees to lend Jim the $260,000, but not without a warning. If Jim fails to pay him back, Frank will destroy his family. He hands Jim the keys to a car, and inside the trunk, Jim finds a bag filled with the money. Jim then goes to Mr. Lee, but instead of paying him back, Jim asks for another loan, this time $150,000. Lee is shocked and can't believe it. Lee's men beat Jim, but he keeps insisting on borrowing more money. Finally, Lee realizes that men like Jim will only recover by gambling again. If Jim wins some money, it's the only way he can hope to pay back what he owes. So Lee gives Jim the $150,000 loan. Then, in an unexpected move, Jim sends Dexter, his student who's skilled at tennis, to Las Vegas with the $260,000 he borrowed from Frank. He instructs Dexter to place a bet on a game there. Lamar does his part of the deal, ensuring that his team wins by less than 7 points. Even though that was all Neville needed to leave Jim alone, Jim, using the winnings from Dexter's bets in Las Vegas, pays off his entire debt to Neville, who lets him go. Now that he's cleared one loan shark, Jim's next challenge is convincing Lee and Frank to meet him at a rundown gambling joint in Koreatown. He knows the only way to settle both debts is to gamble everything he has left and double his money. So, before the astonished eyes of everyone watching, Jim bets everything, every last dollar, on the roulette table, placing it all on black. Jim is sweaty and nervous as he watches the ball spin around the wheel, his life hanging in the balance. Finally, the ball lands on black, on number 22. Jim wins! With visible relief on his face, Jim is finally able to pay off all his debts. He leaves everything he's won to be split between Frank and Mr. Lee. His winnings are more than enough to cover what he owes, and Frank offers Jim the extra cash. But Jim turns it down. He just wants to get out of there. For the first time in years, Jim feels truly free. He runs through the streets of Los Angeles, heading toward Amy's apartment. He doesn't have a penny left in his pocket, but he's certain she'll be happy when he finally knocks on her door. Jim's story is the same one that millions of people around the world experience. The difference is, for many, the game isn't gambling. It's credit cards, which slowly drag people down until they're drowning in debt, suffering from anxiety, and overwhelmed by financial stress. So if you want to escape from credit card debt and you live in the United States, check the video description and call the number. Our sponsor will provide you with a plan to eliminate your debts and let you know how long it will take. Remember, this could be your only way out. Don't miss this opportunity.